My parents sued me for $370,000 because I refused to pay my sister's mortgage. Yes, you heard that right. They literally took their own daughter to court, demanding I hand over nearly $400,000 as reimbursement for raising me, so they could buy my golden child sister a house she couldn't afford. I'm Catherine Sanders, and this is the story of how my family's twisted dynamics finally exploded in the most spectacular way imaginable. For 32 years, I lived in the shadow of my sister Rachel, watching my parents worship the ground she walked on while treating me like an afterthought. But when push came to shove, when Rachel's perfect life crumbled and my parents needed a financial bailout, suddenly I wasn't so forgettable anymore. Let me paint you a picture of my childhood. Rachel was 3 years older, blonde, outgoing, and apparently made of pure sunshine according to my parents. She was the cheerleader, the homecoming queen, the one who could do no wrong. I was the quiet one, the studious one, the one who got straight A's but somehow never quite measured up. When Rachel brought home a C-, my parents would say, "Oh honey, you tried your best." When I brought home an A-, they'd ask why it wasn't an A+. This wasn't just typical sibling rivalry, this was a systematic pattern of favoritism that shaped every aspect of our family life. Rachel got the bigger bedroom, the newer clothes, the first car. When it came time for college, my parents emptied their savings account to send Rachel to an expensive private university where she majored in communications and partied for 4 years straight. When my turn came, they told me I was smart enough to earn scholarships and figure it out myself. So I did. I worked 2 jobs, took out loans, and graduated summa cum laude from a state school with a degree in software engineering. But here's the thing about golden children, they're often not prepared for the real world. Rachel bounced from job to job, always having some excuse for why nothing worked out. She was too creative for corporate life, too free-spirited for structure, too sensitive for criticism. Meanwhile, I climbed the corporate ladder, eventually landing a senior position at a tech company with a 6-figure salary. I bought my own house, paid off my student loans, and built a stable life for myself. For years, I watched my parents enable Rachel's failures. They paid her rent when she couldn't make it, covered her credit card bills, and always had some excuse ready for why nothing was ever her fault. And me? I was the responsible one, the one who had it all figured out, the one who didn't need help. It was like being punished for my own success. The real drama started about 2 years ago when Rachel's life completely imploded. She'd been living with her boyfriend Marcus for 5 years, and my parents had convinced themselves he was going to propose any day now. They'd already started planning the wedding in their heads, talking about grandchildren, the whole fantasy. But Marcus had other plans. He suddenly announced he was moving to California for a job opportunity, and Rachel wasn't invited. Just like that, 5 years down the drain. Rachel was devastated, naturally. She'd been working part-time at a boutique, barely making ends meet, completely dependent on Marcus for everything. When he left, she couldn't afford their apartment, couldn't handle the bills, couldn't cope with adult life. So she did what she'd always done, she ran home to mommy and daddy. My parents welcomed her back with open arms, as if she was some wounded bird who needed their protection. They set up her old room, started cooking her favorite meals, and treated her like she was recovering from some terrible tragedy instead of just facing the consequences of her own choices. But here's where it gets interesting. They started talking about how Rachel needed a fresh start, how she deserved her own place, how homeownership would give her stability and confidence. Now, my parents weren't wealthy people. Dad worked in middle management at an insurance company, Mom was a part-time teacher. They lived comfortably but they weren't exactly rolling in money. So when they started house hunting for Rachel, looking at places in the $200,000 to $300,000 range, I wondered how they planned to make it work. The answer came during one of our monthly family dinners. I still attended these gatherings, partly out of obligation and partly because I kept hoping things might change. We were sitting around the table, and Dad starts talking about this beautiful house they'd found for Rachel. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, nice neighborhood, perfect for a fresh start. Then he drops the bombshell. Of course, we'll need Catherine to help with the mortgage payments, he said, as casually as if he was asking me to pass the salt. She's doing so well financially, and Rachel needs time to get back on her feet. I nearly choked on my wine. I'm sorry, what? Mom jumped in with that voice she used when she was trying to make something unreasonable sound perfectly logical. Well, sweetie, you make more money than all of us combined. And Rachel is family. We all need to help each other out. I looked around the table, waiting for someone to laugh and tell me this was a joke. But they were all serious. Dead serious. My parents had apparently decided that my financial success was somehow family property, that I owed them for the privilege of being raised, and that my primary purpose in life was to subsidize my sister's continued failures. I'm not paying Rachel's mortgage, I said firmly. That's not my responsibility. The temperature in the room dropped about 10 degrees. Dad's face started turning red, that vein in his forehead beginning to pulse. Catherine, we raised you, we fed you, we put a roof over your head for 18 years. Don't you think you owe us something? And there it was, the guilt trip I'd been expecting. The same manipulation they'd used my entire life, trying to make me feel like I was somehow deficient for not being as needy as Rachel. But this time, I was ready for it. I don't owe you anything, I replied. You chose to have children. That was your decision, not mine. I didn't sign a contract promising to pay you back for basic parenting. Mom started crying, of course. The waterworks were always her go-to strategy when logic failed. How can you be so selfish? Rachel is struggling, and you're just sitting there in your big house, hoarding your money like some kind of miser. I'm not hoarding anything, I said, standing up from the table. I worked hard for what I have. I earned it. And I'm not going to light myself on fire to keep Rachel warm. That's when Rachel finally spoke up. She'd been sitting there silently, letting our parents fight her battles as usual. I never asked for this, she said quietly. I never asked you to pay for anything. For a moment, I thought maybe she was going to show some backbone, maybe she was going to tell our parents to stop. But then she continued. But if you really cared about me, if you really loved me, you'd want to help. That's what families do. They help each other. But I guess I should have known better than to expect anything from you. The manipulation was so blatant, so perfectly orchestrated, that I almost had to admire the technique. They'd turned my refusal to enable Rachel's dependency into proof that I was a heartless sister who didn't care about family. It was masterful, really. I left that night knowing that things would never be the same between us. But I had no idea just how far they were willing to go. Over the next few weeks, I started getting calls from other family members. My Aunt Linda, my Uncle Bob, even my 90-year-old grandmother, all of them had somehow heard about the situation and felt compelled to share their opinions. The story they'd been told was carefully edited, of course. According to my parents' version, I was a selfish daughter who refused to help my struggling sister in her time of need. The part about expecting me to pay someone else's mortgage for the foreseeable future was conveniently omitted. The pressure was intense. Every conversation became about family obligation, about doing the right thing, about how disappointed they were in me. My grandmother, who I'd always had a special relationship with, told me she was surprised and saddened by my selfishness. My Aunt Linda sent me a long email about how family should always come first, and how she was praying for me to find it in my heart to help Rachel. But the worst part was the social media campaign. Rachel had always been more popular than me, more social, better at maintaining friendships. She started posting cryptic messages about betrayal, about learning who your real family is, about facing hardship alone. She never mentioned me by name, but everyone knew what she was talking about. The comments section filled up with supportive messages, people expressing outrage at whoever had abandoned Rachel in her time of need. I watched my reputation in our small community slowly disintegrate. Former classmates who barely knew me started looking at me differently at the grocery store. People I'd known for years suddenly had opinions about my character, my values, my worth as a human being. All because I'd refused to pay my sister's bills. But I stood firm. I knew that giving in would only make things worse, that it would establish a precedent I'd never be able to escape. If I paid Rachel's mortgage this time, what would be next? Her car payments? Her credit card bills? Her retirement fund? Where would it end? About 6 months after that disastrous dinner, I got a call from my dad. His voice was different, more formal, almost businesslike. "Catherine, we need to talk. Can you come over this weekend?" I should have seen it coming. I should have known they weren't going to just give up. But even I wasn't prepared for what they had planned. I arrived at their house on Saturday afternoon to find them sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of papers and a man I didn't recognize. He was wearing a cheap suit and had that oily smile that immediately screamed lawyer. "Catherine, this is Mr. Davidson," Dad said. "He's been helping us with some legal matters." Mr. Davidson stood up and extended his hand. "Ms. Sanders, I've heard a lot about you. Please, have a seat." I remained standing. "What's this about?" Mom spoke up, her voice shaking slightly. "We've been thinking about what you said, about how we chose to have children, about how parenting was our decision. And you're right, it was our decision. But it was also an investment. An investment. She actually called raising me an investment. We've calculated the cost of raising you from birth to age 18, Dad continued, pulling out a thick folder. Food, clothing, shelter, medical expenses, education, extracurricular activities, everything. We've kept receipts, we've estimated costs, we've accounted for inflation. The total comes to approximately $370,000. I stared at them, speechless. This couldn't be happening. They couldn't be serious. Mr. Davidson cleared his throat. "What your parents are proposing is a reasonable repayment plan. They're not asking for interest, they're not demanding immediate payment. They simply want you to acknowledge your debt and work out a payment schedule." "My debt?" I managed to say. "Yes," Mom said, tears starting to flow again. "We invested in you, Catherine. We gave you everything you needed to succeed. And now that you're successful, now that you're making good money, we think it's fair to ask for some return on that investment." The pieces started falling into place. This wasn't about justice or fairness or family obligation. This was about money. Pure and simple. They'd found a way to legally justify taking money from me, and they were going to use it to buy Rachel her house. "You're trying to invoice me for my own childhood," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "We're trying to collect what's owed to us," Dad replied. "If you'd agreed to help with Rachel's mortgage, none of this would have been necessary. But you forced our hand." Mr. Davidson leaned forward. "Miss Sanders, your parents have documentation going back 30 years. They've been very thorough. While this type of case is unusual, it's not unprecedented. There have been instances where adult children have been held financially responsible for their upbringing, especially when they're capable of payment and their parents are in need." I looked at this man, this stranger who was helping my parents destroy our relationship for money, and I felt something shift inside me. The last remnants of hope I'd been holding on to, the part of me that still believed my parents might somehow come to their senses, finally died. "I want to see this documentation," I said. For the next hour, they walked me through their case. They had receipts for clothes, records of food expenses, documentation of medical bills. They'd estimated the cost of my portion of the mortgage, utilities, and household expenses. They'd calculated the value of piano lessons, soccer fees, and summer camps. They'd even included the cost of my college application fees and the gas money for campus visits. It was thorough, I had to give them that. Insane, but thorough. The most disturbing part was seeing how long they'd been planning this. Some of the receipts were organized in a way that suggested they'd been saving them specifically for this purpose. They'd been building a case against me for years, maybe decades, just waiting for the right moment to use it. So let me get this straight, I said when they finished their presentation. You're suing me for the cost of raising me, so you can use that money to buy Rachel a house. We're asking you to honor your obligations, Mom said. We're asking you to do the right thing. And if I refuse? Mr. Davidson smiled that oily smile again. Then we'll see you in court. I left that house knowing that my family was gone. Not just damaged or strained, but completely destroyed. They'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, done something so fundamentally wrong that there was no coming back from it. But I also left with a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in years. For the first time in my life, I could see the situation exactly as it was, without the fog of guilt and obligation that had clouded my judgment for so long. My parents didn't love me. They loved what I could do for them. They loved my earning potential, my stability, my usefulness as a financial resource. But they didn't love me. The next few months were a blur of legal consultations, document gathering, and case preparation. I hired the best attorney I could find, a woman named Sarah Chin who specialized in family law. She was smart, aggressive, and completely appalled by my parents' lawsuit. In 30 years of practice, I've never seen anything quite like this, she told me during our first meeting. I've seen parents sue adult children for specific debts, for loans that weren't repaid, for damages to property. But I've never seen anyone try to retroactively bill their child for the cost of parenting. Is it legal? I asked. That's what we're going to find out, she said. But I can tell you this, it's morally reprehensible. And I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure they don't get away with it. The case became something of a local sensation. The story was too bizarre, too outrageous, not to attract attention. Local news stations picked it up, then regional papers, then national media. Suddenly, I was getting calls from reporters, requests for interviews, messages from people around the country who'd heard about the case. Most of the coverage was sympathetic to me, thankfully. Legal experts weighed in, calling the lawsuit frivolous and ethically questionable. Child psychologists discussed the emotional damage of treating parenting as a financial transaction. The general public seemed to understand instinctively that what my parents were doing was wrong. But the media attention also brought out the trolls. Online comment sections filled up with people who thought I should just pay up, that I was being selfish, that family should always come first. Some of these comments were clearly from people who didn't understand the full situation, but others seemed to come from people who genuinely believed that successful children owed their parents financial compensation for their upbringing. Rachel, meanwhile, had gone completely silent. She'd stopped posting on social media, stopped attending family gatherings, essentially disappeared from public view. I heard through mutual friends that she was horrified by what our parents had done, that she'd begged them not to file the lawsuit. But she also hadn't contacted me directly, hadn't tried to distance herself from their actions, hadn't taken any kind of public stand. The trial was scheduled for late spring, almost a year after that awful dinner where this all started. As the date approached, I found myself strangely calm. I'd spent so many years trying to win my parents' approval, trying to measure up to their expectations, trying to earn their love. Now I understood that it had never been about me at all. It had been about what I could provide for them, what I could do for their real favorite child. The courtroom was packed on the day of the trial. Local reporters, curious neighbors, legal students, and random people who'd followed the case online all crowded into the gallery. My parents sat at the plaintiff's table with Mr. Davidson, looking nervous but determined. I sat with Sarah, feeling more confident than I had in months. My parents' case was exactly what you'd expect. They presented their documentation, their receipts, their calculations. Mr. Davidson argued that parents make financial sacrifices for their children with the reasonable expectation that those children will eventually be in a position to provide support in return. He talked about moral obligations, about family duty, about the social contract between generations. It was all very compelling, in a twisted sort of way. If you didn't think too hard about what they were actually saying, if you didn't consider the implications of treating childrearing as a loan, you might almost buy their argument. But Sarah's response was devastating. She started by pointing out that parenting is a legal obligation, not a favor. Parents are required by law to provide food, shelter, clothing, and medical care for their children. You can't bill someone for something you're legally required to provide. She brought in expert witnesses, including a child psychologist who testified about the emotional damage of treating parenting as a financial transaction. She presented evidence of the selective nature of my parents' documentation, pointing out that they'd kept receipts for my expenses but not for Rachel's, suggesting that this lawsuit was targeted and premeditated. Most importantly, she attacked the fundamental premise of their case. If parents could sue their adult children for the cost of raising them, what would that mean for society? Would every parent become a potential creditor? Would every childhood expense become a future debt? Would children have to worry about being financially responsible for their own upbringing? The defense took 2 days. When it was over, the judge announced that she would need time to consider the case and would issue her ruling within a week. Those 7 days were the longest of my life. Not because I was worried about losing. Sarah had made it clear that we had a strong case. But because I knew that whatever the judge decided, my relationship with my parents would never recover. If I won, they'd resent me forever. If I lost, I'd probably have to declare bankruptcy and start over somewhere else. The judge issued her ruling on a Friday afternoon. The courtroom was even more packed than it had been during the trial, with people standing along the walls and spilling out into the hallway. I sat with Sarah, holding my breath, as the judge began to speak. This case, she said, represents one of the most troubling examples of family dysfunction I've encountered in my career. The plaintiffs are asking this court to establish a precedent that would fundamentally alter the parent-child relationship, turning it from a bond of love and obligation into a commercial transaction. She went on to explain that while parents do make financial sacrifices for their children, those sacrifices are made voluntarily as part of their legal and moral obligation to provide care. Children cannot be held financially responsible for their own upbringing, as they had no choice in the matter and no ability to consent to the expenses being incurred on their behalf. Furthermore, she continued, the selective nature of the plaintiff's documentation, combined with their stated intention to use any recovered funds to purchase property for their other adult child, suggests that this lawsuit is not motivated by genuine financial hardship but by a desire to redistribute wealth between their children according to their own preferences. The judge's voice grew stern as she delivered her final verdict. The court finds that the plaintiff's claim has no legal merit and represents an abuse of the legal system. The case is dismissed with prejudice, and the plaintiffs are ordered to pay all court costs and reasonable attorney fees incurred by the defendant. The courtroom erupted. People were clapping, reporters were scribbling notes, and my parents were sitting in stunned silence. I felt Sarah's hand on my shoulder, heard her congratulating me, but it all seemed to be happening from a great distance. I'd won. I'd actually won. The judge had seen through their manipulation, recognized their lawsuit for what it was, and sent a clear message that this kind of behavior wouldn't be tolerated. But winning felt hollow. I'd defeated my parents in court, but I'd also lost them forever. The family I'd grown up with, dysfunctional as it was, no longer existed. I was free, but I was also alone. The aftermath was swift and brutal. My parents, faced with thousands of dollars in legal fees and the humiliation of their public defeat, declared that they were disowning me. They changed their will, removed me from their emergency contacts, and announced to the extended family that they no longer had a daughter named Catherine. Some relatives rallied around them, insisting that I should have just paid the money and kept the peace. Others were horrified by what they'd done and reached out to offer support. The family fractured along these lines, with cousins and aunts and uncles choosing sides like it was some kind of civil war. Rachel finally contacted me about a month after the trial. She called late one night, her voice shaky and small. "Catherine, I'm so sorry," she said. I never wanted this to happen. I tried to stop them, but they wouldn't listen. They said it was the only way to help me, and I didn't know what to do. I listened to her apology, her explanation, her tears. Part of me wanted to forgive her, to rebuild our relationship, to salvage something from the wreckage of our family. But I also knew that she'd benefited from our parents' favoritism her entire life, that she'd never stood up to them when it mattered, that she'd let them destroy our relationship for her financial gain. I know you didn't ask for this, I told her. But you also didn't stop it. You let them sue me, Rachel. You let them try to ruin my life so they could buy you a house. I didn't know how to stop them, she whispered. You could have called me. You could have publicly opposed it. You could have told them you didn't want a house that was paid for with money they stole from your sister. But you didn't do any of those things. We talked for another hour, but it was clear that we'd never be close again. Too much damage had been done, too many bridges had been burned. She was still my sister, and I didn't hate her, but I couldn't trust her. I couldn't have a relationship with someone who would stand by and watch while her parents tried to destroy me. In the end, my parents never did buy Rachel that house. The legal fees from their failed lawsuit ate up most of their savings, and their reputation in the community was permanently damaged. Rachel eventually moved to another city, got a job at a marketing firm, and slowly started building an independent life for herself. I heard she was doing well, that she'd finally learned to stand on her own 2 feet. As for me, I threw myself into my work and my own life. I got a promotion, bought a bigger house, started dating someone who actually appreciated me for who I was rather than what I could provide. I built a chosen family of friends who understood loyalty and respect, who didn't see my success as something they were entitled to. The legal victory felt good, but the real victory was something deeper. For the first time in my life, I was free from the guilt and manipulation that had defined my family relationships. I no longer felt responsible for other people's failures, no longer felt obligated to set myself on fire to keep others warm. I learned that sometimes loving someone means accepting that they're not capable of loving you back in a healthy way. Sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do is walk away, to refuse to participate in toxic dynamics that hurt everyone involved. The money my parents demanded represented more than just a financial obligation. It represented their fundamental misunderstanding of what family should be. They saw me as an investment rather than a daughter, as a resource to be exploited rather than a person to be loved. By refusing to pay, I wasn't just protecting my bank account. I was protecting my dignity, my self-worth, and my right to be valued for who I am rather than what I can provide. The lawsuit was the best thing that ever happened to me, in a twisted way. It forced me to confront the reality of my family dynamics, to stop making excuses for their behavior, and to finally put my own well-being first. It was painful, it was devastating, but it was also liberating. I still get messages sometimes from people who heard about the case. Some are supportive, sharing their own stories of family dysfunction and financial manipulation. Others are critical, insisting that I should have just paid the money and preserved the family relationship. But I know I made the right choice. I know that paying that money would have only enabled more manipulation, more entitlement, more toxic behavior. My parents taught me a valuable lesson, though I doubt it was intentional. They taught me that DNA doesn't automatically create obligation, that family is about love and respect and mutual support, not about financial extraction and emotional manipulation. They taught me that sometimes the people who claim to love you the most are actually the ones who understand you the least. Today, I'm happier than I've ever been. I have genuine relationships built on mutual respect and affection. I have a career I'm passionate about and financial security I earned through my own efforts. I have peace of mind knowing that nobody in my life sees me as a walking ATM or a solution to their problems. The house my parents wanted me to buy for Rachel? It's still on the market, as far as I know. Rachel moved on, found her own path, and learned to be independent. My parents are still bitter, still convinced they were wronged, still telling anyone who will listen about their ungrateful daughter who abandoned them in their time of need. But I sleep peacefully at night, knowing that I stood up for myself when it mattered most. I refused to be reduced to a financial resource, refused to accept that my worth was measured by my willingness to subsidize other people's poor choices. I chose self-respect over family approval, and it was the best decision I ever made. The golden child may have been their favorite, but I was the one who learned to shine on my own. And that, ultimately, is worth more than any house they could have bought. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give yourself is the courage to walk away from people who don't value you. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone else's dysfunction. And sometimes, the family you choose is better than the family you're born into. I hope my story resonates with anyone who's ever felt undervalued in their family, anyone who's ever been expected to sacrifice their own well-being for someone else's convenience. You don't owe anyone your financial security, your mental health, or your self-respect. You have the right to set boundaries, to say no, and to prioritize your own well-being. Family should be about love, not leverage. Support should be freely given, not legally demanded. And sometimes, the most courageous thing you can do is stand up to the people who raised you and say, no more. The courtroom may have been the end of my legal battle, but it was the beginning of my real life. A life where I'm valued for who I am, not what I can provide. A life where my success is celebrated, not exploited. A life where I'm finally free to be myself, without apology or explanation. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening to my story. I'd love to hear about your own experiences with family dynamics, financial manipulation, or standing up for yourself in difficult situations. Drop a comment below and let me know what you think, and if this story connected with you, consider subscribing for more real-life stories that matter.